I'm Katie Campbell and I work in the BAFTA Learning and Events team. Obviously, most of you will have heard of BAFTA as an awards-giving body, but we also run learning events like this, bringing our nominees and winners to audiences across the UK, and we run a full programme of events throughout the year. So if you want to see more of what we do, we have a brilliant online learning resource called BAFTA Guru. So have a look, there's loads more content like this on there. I just want to say a very quick introduction to our two guests. We have chairing today Mike Goodridge from Protagonist Pictures, and obviously a huge thank you to John Battsek, who'll be leading our masterclass. And before I go, very quick, just housekeeping. We're going to do a Q&A at the end of the session, so just wait for the roving mics to come to you, and we'll try and get as many questions in as we can. So a huge thank you to DocFest for hosting us, and over to John and Mike.
Thank you, Katie. Are the microphones on?
Testing. Yeah,
Testing. Yeah, they are. So my name is Mike Goodridge. I'm the CEO of Protagonist Pictures, which is a finance and sales company based in London. I had previously been a journalist, which is probably why I'm doing this. But in the last year that I've been at Protagonist, we have been working with John on two of his productions, The Imposter and Searching for Sugarman. You couldn't get two finer feature documentaries. And of course, as a journalist, when I had followed John's career, closely since One Day in September, which was your first feature in 1999. So I think we have a real opportunity today to learn how John has become one of the leading names in documentary feature production around the world.
John doesn't know.
Well, I will elicit the answers from you.
Okay.
We have some clips, but we're very keen not to sort of follow a chronological structure on this. But I do want to start establishing your life as a teenager and your early life and what film meant to you when you were growing up. Your first feature was actually a fictional film, a narrative called Serpent's Kiss, which I don't know if anybody remembers that film.
I'm sure they don't.
So did you want to get into movies and what?
No, I think my brother and I both wanted to be sportsmen of one sort or another. Would have settled for football, tennis, cricket, anything, but sadly weren't good enough to do that. And our dad was a movie buff, just loved movies, and so was forever taking us to the cinema and making us watch Marx Brothers films, not making us, encouraging us to watch Marx Brothers films on television. So we would it was either sport or films, definitely not academia. And and so I guess that's where a great interest in and love of films came from. And my brother, who's my elder brother, has always sort of been my hero. And I sort of followed him wherever he's gone. And he went into the film business. He went
Palace Pictures.
Palace. He started in Australia, actually, at Hoyts, and then came to England and worked at Palace. And I just sort of, like I said, he was like my idol. I just did whatever he did. And so I sort of stumbled my way into an area of the film business, having failed at everything academic, pretty much up to that point, as did he.
So what did you start doing?
I started as a film publicist. I started at a company called PSA, Phil Symes Associates, and I started I was living in a little bedsit under my dad's apartment in central London, and I asked them if they'd give me a job, and they didn't have to pay me, I said, because I just wanted to get in the door. And so that's how I started. I was a publicist for this company, which involved mainly licking the back of envelopes and sticking them down, and occasionally sort of making a phone call to a sort of press person somewhere, trying to convince them to look at a video, it probably was then, or maybe even come to a screening.
But you must have met some filmmakers along the way.
It developed, and I actually, it was fantastic. It was like, I was so excited to just be working in anything to do with films. And it was, we had accounts like Golan and Globus, all those awful, terrible films they made. But for me, it was just, I was just working in something that was even vaguely connected to the film industry and to making films, and I just thought it was incredibly exciting. And I was good at it, not just the licking of envelopes bit, but it turned out that to be a publicist, you just need to be able to talk relatively confident about something you know nothing about, which remarkably I seem to be able to do, as you're about to find out. And So I worked there, and then I got a job at Palace Pictures, where my brother was already working in the distribution arm, and I got a job as their in-house publicist, and then started to work on Down by Law, and I mean, just amazing films. I joined there just after Absolute Beginners, and it was incredibly exciting to just be part of this operation with Nick Powell and Steve Woolley and Paul Webster, and my brother was there, and yeah, all these like amazing films, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, Down by Law. The great thing about Palace in those days was there was like a Carla Sauer film, and then a Jim Jarmusch film, and then a Robert Englund film, like this complete sort of cross-section. And I got to do some amazing stuff and meet amazing people.
It didn't have much longer after Absolute Beginners, did it?
No, that's not quite true. The company, you mean?
Yeah.
No, I think it had a good decade, didn't it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean,
92, I think it went down.
Right, did it? It felt like a long time. And there were a lot of films, you know, Wild at Heart, and I mean, just some really, just incredibly amazing things to have been any part of. So,
you wanted to get into production?
No, I didn't actually.
No, you didn't?
No.
How did Serpent's Kiss emerge?
Well, it emerged because I was a publicist for 10 years, and then I figured that I could, and there's no great credit to myself, I could basically do it. You know, it was the same thing each time. Different film comes along, you call the same people, you give them the same spiel, they either buy it or they don't. And actually, part of what had happened for me was I got to a point where I couldn't bullshit people anymore. So if we had a bad film, this is a journalist that I'd known for like 10 years now, I couldn't say, you know, and it's really great. I'd say, and it's shit. Sorry, but do you mind coming to... And that's not great for a publicist, really.
I think a journalist appreciates that honesty, but anyway, you know.
They do, but the distributor and the producer don't. And so I figured my time was up. And it was a tricky moment, actually, because I had no qualifications that I could move on to, you know, like to be a biologist or something. And so I figured, you know, I've 10 years in the business. I'd actually... actively, because Palace had moved into production, and I'd watched them do it, and I thought, I don't want to do that. That looks miserable. Definitely don't want to be doing that. But when I came to the end of being a publicist, I thought, well, what the hell am I going to do? And then I just, it was literally as daft as the sense I got was that if you wanted to be a producer, part of it, maybe even 50% of it, was who you knew. And I misguidedly thought I knew a lot of people by that point, because as a publicist, you know, I'd met a vast number of people. And because my brother had become like really well respected, I figured maybe some people might get confused as to which one was which, so I could sort of get a bit of his kudos, which I did. And so I thought, okay, I know lots of people, I'm going to be a film producer.
Sure, why not?
Whatever the hell that means.
Yeah.
So I embarked on trying to find a script that I could produce, and shortly found myself working in a promotional company doing like buy-for-one promotions in supermarkets, because it ain't that easy to find a script and become a producer overnight. But I did find a script. It was called The Serpent's Kiss, and I sort of persuaded the agent of the writer to let me have a 6-month option for nothing on it, and you know, there again, my ability to just talk seemed to serve me well, and he agreed to do it, and I set off on the road of trying to produce the film, and befriended the writer, who has become a great friend of mine, and spent 4.5 of the most miserable years of my life producing that film. Yeah.
Which has gone down in history.
Yeah, people say I haven't seen it, and I say neither has anyone else. although I would say, actually, you know, the one residue of being a publicist in film, a film publicist, was I'd sort of decided that the only glamorous thing in the movie business that remained as a glamorous thing was to have a film in competition at Cannes, because I was there with Wild at Heart and probably a couple of others, and it was like so dazzling and amazing to a young whatever age I was. And The Serpent's Kiss was selected for competition in Cannes.
Oh, fantastic.
Which was, despite the fact I hated the film, was nevertheless kind of an amazing experience. To go through that red carpet and the trumpeters and all that nuts, crazy stuff was kind of fun, even though for me, the gloss is definitely taken off when you're thinking, oh God, now we've got to watch the film.
Couldn't you have snuck out?
No, I didn't. No, these days I would. In those days, I didn't have the guts.
During this period, did you work on documentaries? Did documentaries mean anything to you?
No and nothing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I knew nothing about documentaries in any way, shape, or form. Hadn't even thought about them. I possibly have watched some, but they must have been about Chelsea Football Club or something like that. Nothing of any great significance. I had no knowledge of them at all. what happened.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we get from Serpent to One Day in September?
Well, very, very quickly and actually directly. I came back from Cannes. I was deeply depressed because I'd done the publicity thing, I'd done the movie producing thing, and that was definitely not for me. And so I was struggling. It's like, what the hell am I going to do? And actually, it was a really tricky moment because I really didn't know what the hell I was going to do. And I was walking along Fulham Road, having just been at the parade where Chelsea paraded the FA Cup that they just won that weekend. And I wandered into the cinema and I watched When We Were Kings. And halfway through that film, literally a light just went off. It was an amazing and kind of, I want to say beautiful, which is probably a bit of a pompous word, but it was a beautiful thing. I was watching this film and halfway through I just thought, this is what I want to do. I want to make films like this. I just loved, it was everything that I love. It was sporting, and yet it was so much more than that, and it was archive that I found compelling, and it was funky music, and it was exciting, and this amazing charismatic figure in the middle of it, and it was real. I mean, that was the thing about the movie that made it so hard was it was all bullshit anyway. It was like make-believe nonsense. This is reality, and I just was like completely and utterly inspired. So I thought, I want to do this. I want to make a film like that. I want to make films like this. I left the cinema, got in my car, drove around town for an hour or so, like thinking I was going to think up an idea there and then. I don't know why I would have thought that. And I was thinking, what could be told that way? What could be told that way? And in that hour, at a certain point, the Munich Olympics just popped into my head. Seriously, yeah. Just popped into my head. And I thought, that's interesting. Well, that could be interesting because I'm sports mad. Munich Olympics, I know athletes died at those Olympics. I know Israeli athletes died at those Olympics, but I don't really know much more than that. And I remember thinking, but if that happened today and 12 athletes were killed at the Olympics, I mean, it would be like, well, you can imagine, it would just be, and today now is whatever it was, 1997 at that point. It would have been like the biggest story on the planet. And so the fact that I didn't know any of the details made me think, well, maybe there's something worth investigating there. And that was the start of me becoming a documentary producer.
So it was all conceived by you, essentially.
Yeah. Yes, it was.
In the sense that you were retelling a story that one would assume people were familiar with, but it soon became clear that people weren't really that familiar with the story.
Yeah, I mean...
25 years later or whatever it was.
Yes, I think it was one of those things where, yes, there'd been lots on it and little snippets on a Panorama or a Newsnight or whatever over the years. I think we probably also, I at the time I was working in an office with Andrew MacDonald in the same office. While I'd been making that awful film, he made a couple of really small films, one called Shallow Grave and the other called Trainspotting. That had made my producing experience that much better. But I befriended his brother as well, Kevin, and I'd seen some of his docs, and I thought they were wonderful. And so he and I had started talking about maybe working together, and I immediately spoke to him about this idea, and we agreed we'd try and develop it together. And I think what we probably did, because I don't remember now, I'm afraid, but I think what we probably did is, as we pitched it, we immediately said, and we've got all sorts of new material and footage that people have never seen, and all that kind of stuff that everyone now pitches to everyone when they're putting documentaries together. So I think we probably immediately made it sound like there was something to be revealed and something, new and exciting. And also, I suppose, we probably said that this hasn't been, the fact that none of us know really what happened would suggest that this hasn't been told properly.
Let's watch a clip before we talk about the film. Of One Day in September. It's an amazing film that obviously went on to win the Academy Award, launched Kevin's career in earnest, I think, didn't it, really?
I mean, you'd have to ask him that.
Yeah. The process of putting it together and the process of turning it into something very visceral, I mean, that trailer makes it look... sends chills down the spine. I mean, you know, is this something that you formed at the time, this sort of sense of what makes a film cinematic, do you think?
I mean, you know, I'd love to be able to tell you that I knew this is exactly what, you know, I knew exactly what the style was going to be and had it all mapped out. I didn't. You know, Kevin was brilliant, and we had Justine Wright. That definitely, I can say that launched Justine as an editor. You know, that was her first feature-length anything, I think, that she cut. It was, I suppose, you know, I mean, we had creative ambitions for the film. You know, we wanted to make something that would be like the definitive telling of the story, and we wanted to make it, you know, again, thinking of When We Were Kings, we wanted to make it this sort of big screen, you know, ambitious, cinematic, powerful film. And we wanted it, we were snobs. We wanted it to feel like a movie. We wanted to be able to show it in cinemas and, you know, all that stuff that we probably still are to a certain extent. Or, you know, that people get very seduced by the idea of, you know, it's going to be in the cinema. And that's what we wanted to do. And, you know, Justine, as it turns out, was a brilliant editor, and she brought everything, you know, all her skill to it, and Kevin and everything that he brought to it. And, you know, it was just a coming together of people who were young and wanted to sort of break the mold to a certain extent, and you know, loved cool music, and the idea of, you know, juxtaposing those sort of images with Deep Purple music, which, you know, was pretty...
Were there interviews in the film? I don't remember.
Yes.
So
we interviewed lots of people in the film, the Germans, the Israelis, you know, the one sole surviving terrorist and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, that's, of course you did, yeah.
And how
much did it cost?
God, I don't really remember. It was like, you know, it was a lot of money at the time. It was probably, you know, it was probably $1 million something or others.
Pounds?
Maybe not, but up that way, yeah. You know, we had Led Zeppelin. It's the first time Led Zeppelin had ever licensed a song for a film. They subsequently did, but this Immigrant Song was the first time they did, you know, and none of that stuff comes cheaply. Lots of archive, lots of music, you know, shot on film, edited for God knows how long, forever.
And that sort of plunged you into the world of documentaries, didn't it? Which was it was a different landscape at the time in the late 90s than it is now. Yeah. The theatrical documentary wasn't such a common thing, was it? You'd had Hoop Dreams and When We Were Kings and some big ones, but nothing... Yeah.
Well, I guess what that film did for me as a producer was, because it was regarded as good, it worked creatively, and because it won that award, it put me in a position where I reckon whatever I wanted to do next as a producer was going to be fairly easy to do because, you know, of the sort of afterglow of that film. And what I had discovered was that, you know, that moment I'd had in When We Were Kings was absolutely right. Making that film was a rewarding experience in so many ways, both professionally, but just as significantly from a life-changing, life-living point of view. It was perspective on it. It was just such an amazing thing to do. You know, have an idea, meet real people, tell their story, do it well as it happens. Enjoy the process. I could explain, but it would take forever.
Was it dramatically different than making the
incomparable? It doesn't compare in any way. I mean, for a producer particularly, because, you know, one of the things that I enjoy so much when making docs as a producer is I can actually do something. You know, on a movie, at a certain point, producer, you've done your bit, bugger off, we'll see you at some point, and we may listen to you, but we probably won't. You know, on a doc, I mean, that's my experience in producing, of course. On a doc, you know, I remember very clearly, very close to the end of the film, I was in the Groucho Club with Kevin, Justine, and our principal financier, who's a lunatic called Arthur Cohen. And we were talking about something wasn't quite right with the film and what we were going to do. And, you know, there's that fabulous sort of small collaboration that makes these films. And I heard a voice in the lobby of the Groucho Club, and because I'm a sports anorak, I recognized that voice. It was someone who appears in the archive of our film. He's an ITN reporter. He's called Gary Newbon or something. Yeah, Gary Newbon. I recognised his voice, and I can't remember exactly what happened, but somehow I bolted straight up to him, and I had a chat with him about the film, and I explained what we were, because he's a journalist. I think that's what we were missing. We felt we were missing some of it. And he said, you want to talk to Gerald Davies. Shit. I think that's his name. Did someone just say his name? No. So he gave me his number. I called him. He's an author, but he was like right in the thick of it for the Daily Mail. 2 days later, we're in his apartment shooting an interview. A day later, we've cut it into the film. It's the final piece of the jigsaw. Job done. And I've been in that situation on every film I've ever made now. And there's just something incredibly enjoyable about that. Okay, what are we going to do about this, and how are we going to do it? And it's not always me who figures it out, but your hands are really genuinely dirty, and I love that. And that's without ever having had any creative. It's not like I think I'm a visionary or I know how to make. It's like suddenly I discovered that I really enjoy that, and I'm decent at it. So that film just was,
because in narrative film the director is everything. In television production, the producer is sort of more important than the director, the writer-producer anyway. And in documentaries, the producer is far more significant.
Yeah, but I think it's the producer, the director, and the editor. It's like it is a proper collaboration. That's the other thing. It is a proper collaboration. The music supervisor is a big deal. I mean, and there's so I just so enjoy being part of sharing that, as opposed to the sort of hierarchy of my experience of the hierarchy of trying to make drama movies is just so much bullshit involved. It's just not. It's just and so ultimately,
because of actors, do you think? Or?
I mean, it's because I tell you my theory, and it's probably nonsense. It's because of what lies at the ultimate end of the potential for glory with a film distorts people's brains because they want it all for themselves, and I don't give a shit about
money
that.
And
whatever.
Oscars,
No,
right?
I mean Oscars and accolades and people genuflecting and just the whole "you're the greatest thing that ever walked the planet" type guff that I don't give a damn about. I care about making as good a film as possible, and as I said, this sort of team spirit of and this is we did it together. I always think film should say film always says a film by. I think it should say a film by all of us, because that's what it is. And just finally on the sort of the icing on the cake for me about One Day in September, and it's true. It's real people telling you the truth. They're not stropping about whether they're coming out their trailer or not to rattle off a few lines of make-believe. These women had lost their husbands and their fathers and their brothers and their sons, and they were telling it like it really was. And the value in understanding, especially for a bullshitting film publicist, the value of understanding, deal with the truth, completely changed pretty much everything. Not that I was a bullshitter in every aspect of my life, but I knew I could if I needed to, and it really helped me understand this is what it's all about.
Yeah. I suppose the Steven Spielberg film Munich was probably inspired by One Day in September.
I think it certainly played a part, yeah, it definitely played. I know he spoke to Kevin at some point and, watched the film, and yeah, I'm sure it played a part.
So the power of the documentary was basically to reignite this story,
Yeah, possibly, although the families have always been seeking, compensation and reparation, and although it put it right back up in the spotlight, they've never got what they wanted. But anyway.
So, I mean, just backtracking over your 15 years since then, do you tell us about how you get involved as a producer? I mean, on this one, you came up with the idea.
Yeah.
You were on it every step of the way. Obviously, it's sort of more industrial now. You've got a company.
It depends, yeah. There's a split now. We get approached a lot of the time with people who have ideas and they're at various stages of, and will we help them raise the money, or they've raised the money, will we help them creatively, so there's a fair amount of that, and now we pick and choose which films that we really gravitate towards, and then we still have, whether it's me who has the idea or someone in my team or a director, I still produce X number of documentaries. It's probably like a 60-40 split now in terms of other people's films that we get on board to help them make and our own films that we generate.
And they could come to you with an almost finished film.
Yeah, well, in some respects, Malik Benjalul almost did. In some respects, you know, the director of Searching for Sugarman, he'd done an awful lot of the work, and the cut that we first saw, well, that came to Simon Chin and then Simon gave to me, it made me cry. So it was on the way there, that's for sure.
Well, we can talk about that film now.
Yeah.
First, explain your relationship with Simon Chin, another
Right.
big name in documentary producing.
Simon produced Man on Wire, and after Man on Wire was having a bunch of meetings with other production companies to see if they would be interested in housing him and James Marsh's next feature doc. I mean, the idea that anyone would say anything other than absolutely is beyond me. I think Man on Wire is like as good a film as I've ever seen in feature doc terms. And so we agreed that we would help them. We'd work with them. We'd co-produce Project Nim, and then it was a time when everyone was suffering. The economies of the world were collapsing, and it felt like, you know, the marketplace was shrinking. And so Simon and I, we discussed this idea that maybe it would be a good idea to team up in one form or another, because if we presented ourselves as a team, we'd get, in these difficult times, we'd maybe get more chance of getting interesting projects and being able to raise money. So we agreed that we would have a sort of arm's length, we call it a strategic alliance with a big grin because it sounds pompous. And we formed, it's not a partnership. His company, Redbox Films, we house them in our office, and he and I do, 60, 70% of what we do together, either producing together or he produces, I exec, or the other way around. And so that's how...
And you still both do your own
when we do our own
individual
things, yeah, absolutely.
So let's just watch a clip from Sugarman and talk a little bit about how that worked. So there's that film with that extraordinary story. Tell us what shape it was when you first saw it. Was the structure the same?
Yeah, it was 3/4 of the way there, I'd say. Malik, the director, had sort of run aground. He'd fallen out with the producer he'd had in Sweden. He had run out of money. He definitely, it was grinding to a halt. And but the shape was very definitely there, As I said, I watched the cut, and I genuinely, it's like the second time this has happened, I'm a softie, but I was crying several times because I found it, it was already really moving and uplifting and all that stuff. And so I suppose, it's funny because now we look at it and go, oh, yeah, Sugarman, it won everything and it's a huge hit. And I'm trying to remember what it was like. For all that it was I really enjoyed watching it. It's not like, none of it, we didn't know it was a home run, I mean, this film is that film has lived a magic life. It's literally been sprinkled with fairy dust. And so we had a conversation about, should we, shouldn't we, can we, can't we, will we, won't we get on board and help, and we decided that we would. And really in that instance what that meant was helping him raise more money to finish it, which Simon specifically did, but together we raised a bunch of money. Helping him finish it creatively. And in some respects with Malik, what that meant was stopping him from messing around with it, because he made this film he did everything himself and he couldn't stop fiddling with it. And actually that's often a problem for directors, is that, they don't want to finish because it symbolizes too many worrying things for them. But
the next one.
Well, yeah. And so but also, I actually think in this instance, because this is only whatever it was now, I suppose it's 2 years ago or whatever, whenever it was, and I'm sort of reluctant to say this, but I guess it is the truth, and that is, for a film like this, just having Simon and I, Passion Pictures and Redbox, on that film, I think, immediately from the marketplace point of view, elevated it,
Sure.
I mean, that's, I suppose, just the fact of where we are now, for a little film like that, from a first-time skinny little Swedishman that no one had ever heard of, about a singer no one knew anything, having us, when we approached Sundance and when we approached Sony Classics, all of that, having us on board, I think, elevated that film to a point where it may well never have
achieved that.
No, yeah exactly.
With something like Sugarman, that's a sort of more guidance role, isn't it, than your traditional?
Yeah, it is
producer
actually.
role?
It is. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's that's the perfect word for it. We didn't do anything revolutionary to it shape-wise, but we guided him towards getting it finished, making it as cinematic as possible, and then getting it out in the right sort of way.
So you must have to be very selective about what you take on, because you're protecting your own reputations and your own brand, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true. You know, I mean, so far, touch wood, we've done well in terms of, if you look at the list of films that we've made, and I don't very often, but when I do, I'm kind of amazed at how many there are. And actually, you know, there isn't a stinker yet. And given that I've made 2 movies, well, I've now made a third, but leaving that one aside, I made 2 movies and they both stunk. You know, it takes something to get it right.
What was the second one?
It's called Lila Says. Lila dit ça. It was a French film that I co-produced. I mean, yeah. It didn't stink as much as the first one, but anyway. So yes, you have to be very selective. And the truth about that is, ultimately, with what passion chooses to do, I mean, the truth, again, is that it's like, my instinct either says I want to do this or I don't. Like, I was just in the meat market, and there's a film that someone pitched to me. Couldn't even really tell you why, but I like it. There's something about it that I think, and it's foreign language, but there's something there that really interests me, that you know, and that's my dad making me watch lots of films. I don't know what it is. And that's what dictates what we will or we won't do. Because passion is tiny. It's me. I have a head of production, and I have Nicole Stott. My head of production is George Chignall. Nicole Stott, who sort of runs everything with me. But ultimately, it's the three of us.
So it's not some huge
infrastructure. It's not like, you know, the development department and the production department and it's like 3 people.
Do things like Sugarman and the hit docs, do they make lots of money for you?
No, nothing makes lots of money for us. Not lots of money. But, you know, we make a decent living doing what we do, and again, without wishing to sound daft, you know, the rewards of doing what we do aren't about making money.
No, yeah, but I'm just...
I mean, some people making films is about that.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I don't mean to be flippant. I want to continue to make a living, and as good a living as possible. But, you know, we do well enough to be able to pay ourselves all right and to keep my staff going and to, you know, we do okay. I'm sort of like, it's not much of an answer, is it really?
What does it
We're
make...
stinking rich.
Why do you think... Why do you think Kevin MacDonald and James Marsh, you know, their trajectory is towards narrative feature filmmaking, isn't it? Is
that a real question? Why do I think?
No. Why do you think that is the trajectory for a lot of directors?
Because no one can resist it. No one can resist it. It's just so seductive, isn't it? I mean, you see all those miserable celebrities in the newspapers, like, looking miserable. Who would want to be them? Seriously, I don't have an explanation for it. I do not. It's like... Everyone wants to make movies. It's because they want to be having dinner with Jennifer Garner and be able to call their mates and say, "You never guess what? I had dinner with Jennifer Garner." Or Jennifer, what's the one from who won the Oscar?
Lopez or
any
Jennifer
of the Jennifers.
Lawrence.
Jennifer Lawrence. And you know, I'm not immune to it myself. I went to a pre-BAFTA dinner and sat next to her, and I was on the phone like, "Guess who I sat next to at dinner?" So, but actually, I genuinely believe people can't resist the lure of all that glamorous nonsense.
There we go on narrative filmmaking.
I mean, of course, Kevin and James would say they're brilliant directors and they want to creatively push themselves. That's the correct answer.
Right.
Mine's just bitter and twisted and whatever.
Let's look at another example of your producing. The Imposter, say.
Exec producing with a small e.
What about Manhunt?
Manhunt, or why don't we look at Fire in Babylon? Change the tone a little bit.
Which is another sport-themed film, which did very well in the UK.
Did do well, yeah.
Tell us about how that came.
Well, actually, Fire in Babylon, again, Fire in Babylon happened because 2 people, Ben Elliott and Ben Goldsmith, who have nothing to do with the film business, but a man about cricket, came to Charles Steele, who's a great friend and a producer, and said, "We want to make a film about the West Indian dynasty of cricket." Charles had never made a doc in his life, so he brought it to me and said, "What do you think of this?" And I mean, I'm trying to think what that's the equivalent. That's like saying to me, "We've decided we want you to play centre forward for Chelsea, will you?" It's like, I was there, I lived not every, but I mean, it's just like, yes, of course I'll do it. So Ben and the 2 Bens brought us this idea, and we set about trying to put it all together.
So you properly produced this one? You know what I mean?
Yeah. We properly produced it, although Ben brought the money with them, so we didn't, for the most part, so we didn't have that part of the producing to do. But we did then spend 3 years making the damn thing.
Of course, but producing has many elements.
Of course, yeah.
Raising money,
Yes,
obviously being one of them. But I think of you as more a creative producer in the sense that you're involved in the films, you have a sense of what works, sense of structure, sense of marketplace.
I suppose I do that. I also 60% of the time have to raise all the money as well. But yes, like I said, I'm hesitant to say yes, I am all those things.
Just but those are things that a good producer needs to have. No?
Yeah, but it's not. It's like it's just whatever. I don't know why I can, but I can.
What makes a good film theatrical? It's the age-old question.
I think that a sort of a stock answer for me is that the core story needs to be something universal, something people can connect with, but ultimately it needs to transcend that. It needs to be greater than the sum of its parts. It needs to be something that people can identify with and resonates with people on many levels. So if you look at most of these films, they do that. Sugarman's about a musician, but it's not, and a sort of failed musician, but it's not really. It's about love and family and ambition and lack of ambition and honesty. And it's about so many things. It's about a philosophy of life that we all wish we had because it's so admirable. There's so much you can connect to there, and it moves people in so many different ways. And Fire in Babylon is about cricket, but it's not. It's about West Indian. It's about a culture of people rising up against their masters, and it definitely transcends the sporting story and becomes about character and becomes about defiance and becomes about guts and all sorts of other stuff.
Let's just look at the trailer, I think, for Fire.
Is it the trailer?
It's interesting that film did very well in the UK. It was released by a company called Revolver, which is now defunct, sadly. They also released The Imposter very, very successfully, and it made about $1.2 million pounds at the UK box office. Distribution. The Imposter was distributed kind of as a narrative film, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was definitely. We wanted to blur the lines so people weren't quite sure what it was they were going to see, and actually maybe we even wanted them to think they were going to see a movie. Yeah, because, as you know, ultimately, docs don't do the kind of business that a movie does. So if you can con people into thinking they're not quite sure what they're going to be seeing, why the hell not?
Is this your publicity background?
Yeah, exactly.
How closely do you get involved with the distribution?
Very close, actually. I only say exec producer with a small e because Bart Layton and Dimitri Duganis, who run Raw, and Dimitri produced, Bart directed. First of all, they're absolutely brilliant at what they do. Bart, the director, he had such a strong sense of what he wanted to do and such a clear vision. We definitely played an integral part in it all, but it's one of the few occasions where I felt just sort of this guy, he knows what he's doing. He's got such an original perspective on this, and he so knows what he wants to do. All we were really there to do was nudge him here, nudge him there. The editor that he eventually, I found Andrew Hume, who I'd worked with before, who's a brilliant editor who I thought would be great. So we bring in bits of the jigsaw that we know can help him again. An editor who knows how to realize a cinematic vision is in a doc making. The editor is as important as anyone. And I think we just provided counsel for them when needed through the making of it, and then once again, I think also on that film it was being financed by A&E, by Channel 4, Film 4, and I think they wanted to have us on board because that gave them a sense of confidence as well in the whole team. And then of course the whole Sundance and everything that comes from that we've done 1 million times, so that makes the filmmakers feel good, that makes the financiers feel good, and that makes us feel good.
In terms of positioning, you say you've done it 1 million times before. With all due respect to Sheffield and some other great documentary film festivals, Sundance is the key marketplace launch pad for feature docs. Isn't it? Why has it become that? And how does one navigate the Sundance system?
And in terms of getting into it, you mean? Well, first of all, why it's become that, I think...
Very good programming.
Well, it's great programming, but also I think it's, it's the beginning of the year, it's the first festival of the year, and buyers go there, particularly American buyers, go there aggressively wanting to outdo their rivals. And and also, it's high altitude, and I really genuinely think that messes with their heads.
Tell us about the year when you had...
I forget which year it was. It was like 5 or 6 years ago. We had 3 films there, actually. We had Crossing the Line, which was directed by Dan Gordon, who was from Sheffield. We had My Kid Could Paint That, which I was the exec producer on, more of a producer than exec, and In the Shadow of the Moon, which I was the exec producer on, and David, the director, is here at this festival now pitching a new film. And we screened them, and the people went absolutely berserk. This was just before the bottom fell out of the world, I might add. Basically, we got into one of those sort of bidding wars that you read about in the Egos Have Landed, or whatever the hell it's called, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. And from like midnight on the second night of the festival till 5 the next morning, I was locked in a condo just in the middle of town. And on that floor, the third floor, we were negotiating on My Kid Can Paint That. And on that floor, right below, we were negotiating on In the Shadow of the Moon. We had a rep who was sort of guiding us through the whole thing. And it was just like one of those completely surreal, nuts experiences where I was upstairs and a bid would be made and I'd have to go downstairs to meet the distributor, the next distributor on that film. And the numbers were just going up and up and up and up. And as I said to you earlier when we were chatting, there was a point where I thought, in both apartments, I'd go up and down and I'd sit in front of the person who would say, $1.5 million. And I genuinely, in my head, I was thinking, you're nuts. Stop. Seriously, don't bid anymore. You're literally... And, of course, I was thinking it. I didn't say it. And that one sold for $2 million. That one sold for $1.8 million. And just before the festival, we'd sold that one for TV for $500,000 and that one for $1 million. So I'm too tired to do the maths, but it's a ton of money that was done in one evening. And it was... And actually... The sting in the tail is that for the next 4 years, basically everyone blamed us for wrecking the doc business because ultimately neither of those films performed as well as they should have. And then the bottom did fall out of the world and no one bought anything for a while and it was all our fault.
But it was... Even the distributors blamed you.
Well, yes, actually, as I said, Sony Classics, and I'm sure, I don't know whether we're all mates now, so I wonder whether they'd admit it, but they had buyer's remorse. We were barely out of the door and they were already pissed off with us for having bought it for so much money. But I do think what happens it's the beginning of the year and they are everyone wants to beat everyone else. And now we're back it's not quite to that level, but, there was business done, proper business done at the festival this year. In terms of getting into the festival, I don't really know what to say except that we've been incredibly lucky. We've been there 7 consecutive years, varying from 1 to 3 films. I know them all really well. I like them all a lot. I get on with them all a lot. And, I suppose, it's definitely a festival that looks out for its alumni. Not that producers are ever alumni, only directors are. But you know what I mean?
Well, they listen to you, they trust your taste.
I suppose, yeah, I suppose that's also partly what it is. So, yeah. I think if you're trying to get a film into Sundance and you can work through someone who they're very familiar with, it's a helpful thing to do.
I'm interested, the film you had in Sundance last year in US competition was Manhunt, which is a fascinating story about the manhunt for Osama bin Laden. Comes out at the same time, essentially, as...
Just after.
A lavish 3-hour Hollywood version of it.
Oh, yeah, let's watch that. Should we watch that clip?
Should we watch the clip of Manhunt?
Yeah,
which is fascinating, yeah.
Even without sound, it's
no
good.
Sound.
And being a field expert.
Can we get that to the beginning again?
You can't argue with success. And the fact of the matter is...
Difference between being an expert behind a desk and being a field expert.
You can't argue with success. And the fact of the matter is, that we were extremely successful. Once we started using the techniques on Abu Zubaydah, and once he became compliant, we started to collect incredible intelligence. Abu Zubaydah gave us the playbook of how to go after these individuals. So in short order, every chief of operations was either captured or killed.
Ramsey bin Oshib, Nashiri, Hambali, KSM, remember that guy? That was a nice one. But they had him in an Arab yuppie outfit. You know, he's looking very prim and proper. Yeah, I'm like, forget this. I want every guy, bad guy downrange to know what their future is. This is their Mac Daddy. This is their chief gangster. This is your future.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded 183 times.
They tried to quantify the numbers of pourings of water. And eventually the pourings of water used in waterboarding became times. So 183 total pourings of water on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed became 183 times, which is crazy.
Look, it's not FBI versus CIA. I know for a fact that everything that we've been told that resulted because of waterboarding, that's not true.
Only 3 terrorists with American blood on their hands were ever waterboarded. In many cases, it was just a few days. In the case of Abu Zubaydah and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, it was just a few weeks.
This program evolved because, you know, some of the stuff that they tried to do was not working. And during the evolution process, I realized that we shouldn't be part of this, and I shouldn't be even a witness for this. And I reported it to our headquarters, and headquarters pulled us out.
That's fascinating. So it's 2 conflicting opinions.
CIA and arguing with the FBI about torture.
About the effectiveness of
enhanced
torture.
interrogation, yeah.
What was the experience for you of having this film out opposite Catherine Bigelow's film, which got into all sorts of controversial
Well,
media
funny enough,
discussions?
we as I said, we were just after 0.30, and I suppose we were anxious that we were going to get swept up in they fudged the torture issue as well, accusing us of that, and we didn't actually. We didn't fall foul of that, and actually the response in America to the film has been fantastic. It's actually, we made it for HBO, and they've aired it already. It premiered at Sundance. In this country, it's hopefully going to premiere at the London Film Festival, but our partners are Sky Atlantic, who have a deal with HBO and shows some of their films, but they are going to be premiering this film later in the year, which I'm very pleased about. And, you know, it seems to have compared very favourably for people to 0.30. And as I said, certainly in America, the response we got was phenomenal, which was, oh, look, and there's my fellow producer of it, Julie Goldman, who's just snuck in because she knew that's what we were going to be talking about. So she wanted a quick round of applause herself. No, I made that with Julie and Greg Barker, and it was our 3rd film together. And yeah, so there was a bit of nervousness, and we were all like worried. Well, I wasn't, but people were worried about Bigelow, and were we going to get swept up in some sort of negative aftermath of that? But we didn't. And actually, it's one of the films that, although you can't necessarily tell from that clip, which looked awful, I apologise for that. But when we saw it in Sundance, you know, and I've now had a bunch of films at Sundance, and normally when I sit there and watch our films, I hate the experience for whatever reason. I really enjoyed watching that film in Sundance, which she's smiling. It is rare for me to do that, but I watched it and I thought, wow, this is a good film. Even
though you'd probably seen it,
I'd seen it
50 times,
gazillion times, and actually that film, we literally, I mean, people say this often about getting films to Sundance, but we finished it a day before we got to Sundance. I mean, we were mixing it. We had our composer scoring music for us 3 days before we got to Sundance. I mean, it was nuts, completely mad. Yeah, it's got a lot of people brought an awful lot of skill to that film. The graphics on the film, which were done by the Mill, are really. And I was actually worried about the graphics in the edit. I was constantly banging on and moaning about the fact that I thought that they might confuse more than they clarified. I was completely wrong. People really responded very well to, and they're beautifully done, really fantastically done. And the Mill were amazing to us because, you know, being a documentary, we had to offer them like a tenth of what they would normally get for the kind of stuff they normally do, and the music was Philip Shepherd, who we've made many films with, who did a fantastic job. Joe Beanie cut the film, and Joe Beanie's, you know, one of the great doc editors who he and I have had something of a checkered past, so it was great to do a film together and for it to really work well. You know, it was a lot of people bringing a lot of their best to the table, and I felt like it showed, which was really nice.
Do you think, when you look at the fictionalized or the narrative version of the story versus the real people talking about it, that people take a documentary more seriously? And you can be as manipulative in a documentary, presumably, as you can.
You can, actually, yeah. I don't really know. I think it's a lot less people taking a documentary in any way than it is a movie, isn't it? Do people take 0.30 seriously? I bet they do, especially in America. I bet they think that's exactly how it all went down. And I don't necessarily have anything against the film. I like the film. I mean, there are areas of it where they change the story dramatically, which I find really baffling when you're purporting to tell a true story. But I suspect an audience in England will take it less seriously than an audience in America. I don't know if that's rude of me. I didn't mean it to be, but
Meaning
that I think the British understand that there's an element of whatever it is, exaggeration or distortion or manipulation, that it isn't. It's a movie. It's not exactly how it went down. Although, to be fair to 0.30, The Raid is exactly how it went down. And brilliantly done.
Well, I think that's where they got intel on that, didn't they?
Yes.
From the government.
People are walking out.
I know.
I wanted to say at the beginning, I challenge anyone at any point to just shout, boring, when it is boring, because we'll shut up. I will.
Yes, well, why don't we have some questions now? It's just the right time. Yeah. Questions for John Battsek. His career is so large that we haven't even covered all the films we had clips for, so...
What have we not seen?
We haven't seen Restrepo or Tillman's Story or The Imposter.
Right, okay.
But we just haven't got the time.
I'm most interested in...
Horrid.
I'm most interested in getting that first film made. So, do you think that you'd have been able to find it as easy to make One Day in September without having all those contacts you already had from being in publicity?
Well, the honest answer to that is yes, because actually the contacts from publicity helped me not one bit to make One Day in September. I suppose, as I was saying earlier, what I got from the publicity was the ability to cold call someone I'd never met in my life, knowing that I didn't really know what the hell I was talking about, and try and talk them into something I was trying to do. So that's just about a sort of skill, if that's the word to use. I don't think it is. That came from that. But I don't think. I think first films, like any film, stand or fall on how good the film is you're trying to make. What's the story? Has it got what it takes to be the film you want it to be? I feel like that's the key ingredient. It's not, obviously, I mean, now you have lots of festivals like this where you can get in front of people who are in the business of financing those films. So I do feel it's about, what was that?
I'm not quite
Someone
sure.
just strangled a pigeon. So I don't know if that's much of an answer, but that's kind of, yeah, I think, if I was trying to make a movie, trying to make a drama, yeah, I couldn't have done it without knowing the people that I knew. But One Day in September, I was...
I just think £1 million, I think to most people here that seems like quite a daunting amount to raise.
Yeah, I didn't know that's what we were raising at the time. And it only became 1 million because we went like £250,000 over budget, which we weren't meant to do. But the budget wasn't that to start with. It was still a big-ish budget at the time, but it was And it was hard to raise. I raised it out of America, and that's where I first met Julie, in fact, and then lost it because she reneged on the deal. No, her bosses did. And then I raised it from somewhere else, and then I did cold call this man called Arthur Cohen out of nowhere. And I suppose, if I'm honest, I only knew about him because someone I had met, Sandy Lieberson, who's a very well-respected producer, had said, you should call this guy, he's big into documentaries. So that's, sort of an answer, but not much of one.
Next question. Sir.
Well, I think these days, it's always good to have a trailer that you can show people. So cut something super sexy and, that feels like it. I mean, it can't just be, it's sort of stating the obvious. It can't be archive for the sake of archive. You've still got to be telling a compelling story. The fact that you have archive, and if it's unseen archive, that people have always, I don't quite get it. I definitely, I subscribe to it, but people are utterly compelled by archive in documentaries. It does something to them. And, often in films we've made, and One Day in September is a case in point, people have gone, that archive that you used there is amazing at the airport. It's actually rubbish. It's like a black screen with a few pops going off, but the fact is, it's a piece of archive of something very dramatic going on in the background, and people get totally transfixed by it. So if you've got great archive, and funny enough, I'll just tell you very quickly, when I first sat down with Arthur Cohen, the very first meeting I ever had with him, when he came to London to meet me after I pitched him the film over the phone, he was sort of eccentric and mad, and we talked about the subject and blah, 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 blah. And he kept saying to me, but have you got great archive? And I go, I think we've got great archive. Then we go on to something, but have you got great archive? He kept coming back saying, what's the archive like? Have you got great archive? Have you got great archive? I was like, yes, we've got good archive. And he said, because if you haven't got great archive, you won't win the Oscar. I mean, I was like just trying to figure out how to put my left foot in front of my right, and the man who I was trying to get money at was already thinking, and you know what? He won us, and we won the Oscar. So yeah, he had won 4 already, so he knew what he was talking about. But you've still got to get it into a shape where it delivers something to a potential financier, where they can see something that is going to engage an audience and tell a story.
Next. Down here.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, my name's Katie Bailey from Century Films, and I'm just interested, John, in your perception of where how the theatrical documentaries are perceived in the States at the moment. So, in terms of, you said the bottom fell out, and are we on our way up? Are we sort of where we were with Touching the Void? How is it? What's the perception of the doc when you go to Sundance and there are people selling narrative films? Is it the sort of worthy but must do, or the kind of celebrated want? I just, where are we?
I would say, generally, America, everywhere, we are in a very good place. The business is good. People have really fallen in love with docs. There's a huge appetite for them. There are twice as many financiers of them in the States, particularly now, than there were 3 years ago. I genuinely think that it's all good right now. And
do you think it's crucial to pull in some US money?
I mean, it depends. It depends on the nature of the film, on your ambitions for the film, on how big the budget of the film is. For us, because we are trying to make high-end theatrical docs, which means they're expensive to start with. I mean, comparatively. Yes, it's a big deal for us to get an American partner on our films, and we're very lucky because we've partnered with a lot of the big players in that business. So we do fairly well at getting them to partner up with us on the films we're trying to make. But I definitely think that there's a real appetite across the board, internationally and in the US. I mean, for feature docs, and so I think that's a good thing.
I was very interested on Sugarman because Sony Classics, who eventually grossed about $3.5 million on the film in the US, really committed to playing it in theaters for about 6 months.
Yeah.
Which is very unusual for any film in America. So I was surprised and pleasantly so that.
Yeah, that's a funny one, isn't it? I mean, I think we sort of, to a certain extent, you know, we sort of challenged them in a way. Simon and I were like, we had a big old battle with them in the best possible way. Sorry?
A blarney.
Yeah, we did, you know, because we weren't happy with the trailer that they cut, and we were constantly needling them, and I'm sure it was really annoying for them. So I think part of it was, I mean, they thought this was an Oscar winner from, they took it off the market, they took it off the table basically just pre-Sundance, pretty much. And they were just hell-bent on making it a success. And so they, you know, and actually it opened not very well. And we were like, you've got the marketing materials wrong and blah, blah, blah. And so it was a real like, screw you two, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. We're going to show you two producers that we know exactly what we're doing. And they did. They did a great business with it. And they did win about 1 billion different awards. And so I think, and, you know, so they were definitely like, determined to let it take as long as it needed to take to do that business. And it's, you know, and ultimately, hats off to them. They were completely passionate about it, totally committed to it, and stuck with it. You know, lots of others would have pulled the plug, I'm sure. And they're a brilliant distributor, you know, there's no doubt about it.
With a director like Malick, would you want to bring him back into the fold, or do you encourage him to...
I don't think Malick's an into the fold kind of guy. He's a lovely, lovely guy, but, you know, he's got a... We'd make his next film with him for sure if he wanted us to. I have a sort of very relaxed attitude to that. You know, I feel the same way with Bart Layton, who just walked in the room, and I was just about to mention him. That's Bart, who directed The Imposter. You know, I've said to these guys, I'd love to work with them again, but they know exactly what they're doing. If they want me or us as partners, I'd be delighted, and if they didn't, I completely get it, because they're brilliant at what they do, and they and that man in particular is one of the most talented feature doc directors around. Sorry, Bart. And I kind of like, that's definitely I mean, as I said, I'd love to work with Malick again, I'd love to work with them again, but at the same time, I just love to see them do more great stuff, and if I'm part of it, then fab, and if I'm not, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. A question for John, up there.
What do you think are the things that set apart a television documentary as opposed to a cinematic documentary?
That's a good question. And sort of, I suppose, in a way, harder for me to answer, because I shouldn't really admit this, but I don't watch many TV docs, and I've not really made many TV docs. I suppose, you know, it's first of all the way you make the film, the way whether we very definitely bring, you know, as I said, sort of cinematic ambition to the way we shoot, the way we cut, the way we put music on films. You know, so from the get-go, there's a sort of cinema ambition in our minds, and that's part snobism, as I say, because we just want to be able to tell everyone our films on a big screen, but also because we gravitate towards stories that feel like they have the ingredients to be able to be told that way. And I'm not sure television, and I don't really know, to be honest, as I say, because I'm not enough of I don't watch enough of it, but I feel like TV, the scope and scale of most of the stories probably doesn't have enough of the ingredients to be able to really play as cinema, but someone might tell me that's nonsense. I don't really know. All I can say is that element of feeling like what we're trying to do is much greater than the sum of its parts, that it will fully transcend the core story and have elements that will really sort of resonate on different levels for an audience is key in what makes us feel like this is something that belongs on the big screen, if that's an answer.
Right up at the top.
Gosh, I didn't know there was the people up there.
People who when you're sort of at the very early stages of making a documentary, and you sort of identify, say, you've got a story you want to tell, and you identify key players that you need to feature in the film, how do you go about approaching them? I mean, do you try and entice them in, or are you straight up with them from the beginning about your idea?
So you mean, how do you get the people you want to be in your film to be in your film?
Yeah, do you think that's essential right from the beginning, that you're totally upfront?
I mean, in some respects, you're asking absolutely the wrong person. Because I'm, you know, one of the things I love about what I do is that on every film I have ever made, there's always been at least one and possibly several moments when I've thought to myself, I haven't a clue what I'm doing here, and I'm like way over my head in terms of what I'm trying to achieve. And the only reason I say that in response to that question is I remember on the second film we made, which was a film called Live Forever, which was about that sort of cool Britannia moment when everything, music, art, fashion, British was cool. And I was pitching it to the Film Council at the time, and it required Damon Albarn, Jarvis Cocker, both Gallagher brothers, were kind of what it was built around. And we pitched this film like, this is the film we're going to make, and, we were all gung-ho and bullish, and I didn't have any of them. And, of course, had no idea whether I was going to be able to get any of them at all. But I just figured, I suppose, what I've always felt is that we'll get them. I think that's, obviously, if you can have people wrapped up, then that's fantastic. But I've always had a real sense that, and I'm trying to think of, we've made 40 films, whatever, in 15 years, and the one person who I failed to get across all those films was Pele. Yeah. Well, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, we didn't get Pele. Because the truth is, I don't know. I was going to say, if you remain completely committed and passionate about it, and you're smart about how you approach people, I've always found that works for us. When we made The Tillman Story, which was a film about an amazing American football player who gave up his contract to join the military and got killed in Afghanistan, and then the military and the government lied repeatedly about what happened to him. His family, were very reluctant to make. They turned down everyone up to the point that we approached them. And I was able to raise the money on the strength of the story and a couple of people that we did have, but we didn't have some key people. And I knew it was going to be a real challenge to get those people. I have to say that I actually feel like the reason we got them is because, it sort of probably sounds crazy, I think the reason we got them is because we went about that film in exactly the right way. We brought the integrity to the way we made that film that Pat Tillman and his family had lived their lives. And I really mean that. And that is what made them think, we want to work with these guys. Because we suddenly found ourselves sort of in tune with them in such a profound way. And again, this is one of the amazing things about docs. I told you were going to walk out, didn't I? In such a profound way that actually ultimately, we were able to be completely honest with them about why we wanted them, what we were trying to do, the risks, the ups, the downs. And I do think actually there's a lot of merit in really being completely straight up with people. I don't know if I'm now talking around in circles, but no. I've definitely found that, being as truthful as possible ultimately serves you.
A couple more questions. Sorry, come down to you first.
With regards to the manipulation of the truth, which happens in documentaries, I wanted to ask about where you draw the line between being as true as possible and making an entertaining film that's going to sell, and if you could give an example of where you said, that's enough manipulation, I draw the line there.
Oh, God. Next question. I suppose my answer to that is you can't manipulate to the point of distorting the truth, really distorting the truth. It's got to still have its roots in the honesty of the story that you're telling. We had an instance on One Day in September where my co-producer, Arthur Cohen, the guy I was talking about, who's a sort of passionate, I'm a Jew, but I'm not a practicing Jew. He's a very passionate practicing Jew. And there was a line of voiceover that he wanted on the film that we couldn't verify as being true. In fact, for a while we suspected wasn't true, but he insisted that line of VO go on the film. And so I feel like it was sort of slightly untruthful. And it's the one thing that, it hasn't happened many times, but people have questioned us about, is that really true? Is that really what happened? And I know you're going to make me tell you what the line is, and it's not that significant, but I think it's something like, Michael Douglas narrated the film, and he said something about the East German team colluding with the terrorists vis-a-vis the layout of the apartments or something. I can't quite remember. And I wasn't comfortable with it because I wasn't sure that it was 100% the truth. And it's on the film. And, you know, I hadn't thought about it until you asked that question, but I don't feel comfortable really telling that story even now because if we don't know for sure, I feel like it shouldn't be there. So I guess it's a long way around saying, you know, you can't be changing the actual truth of the story that you're trying to tell. No worries. That was off the record, by the way.
One of my favourite films I've seen is Sergio, which you've not brought up at all. That was beautiful. That's one of the few films I cried at.
Right.
I wondered how the relationship worked transatlantic with Julie and Motto Pictures, and Manhunt as well. That was a great film. Did the films work in the same way, or was it just unique to kind of the production?
Well, it depends. Because I go back so far with Julie, there have been instances. Manhunt was a film where I was much more over here than over there. And also Greg Barker, who directed Manhunt, also directed Sergio, and we did a film together called Quran by Heart. So we built up a sort of language. We built up a way of working together. On Sergio, I very happily moved to Los Angeles and spent the entire time there, so that made that one dead easy. But you know, I've worked with Dan Gordon, who lives here. We've made 9 or 10 films together. Greg, we've made 3. Amir Bar-Lev, we're on our 3rd. You know, I've built relationships with directors and with filmmaking teams that means that actually on Manhunt, I could not be there for a lot of the time. And Julie's in New York and Greg's in LA, but we know how to work together. And actually, as a producer, you don't have to be, you don't have to be literally physically there in many respects. You know, on the Tillman story, I was at every frame of footage that we shot. Sergio, I was there for a lot of it. Manhunt, I was there for relatively little of it. You know, it's sort of, it doesn't really affect the relationship, to be honest. It doesn't really affect the way the film's made, especially these days when, from an edit point of view, you can be zapping each other, whether it's you send it or, you know, I remember when we scored Sergio, we had we did one of those crazy, it was iChat. We were iChatting with someone in London, someone in LA, someone in New York, watching the film all at the same time. It was, you know, you can do so much that way that the geographics are less of an issue these days. But thank you, I love that. I mean, that film, Sergio, was, yeah, that was a really heavy and kind of amazing film to be part of. Sure.
I need to excuse me because this is regarding the project of my own. I'm in a situation, I'd rather not, where I kind of need to produce it kind of quick. I was researching a documentary on a big American rock band, and it's a bit of a sexy trailer, and they like it. But now I'm finding myself in a situation where I need to start finding people to help me. So I just wondered if you've got any advice.
Are you going to be in the hubs pitching to all those people up there looking for movies?
I'm afraid I was a little. This interest has come very recently, but I've missed out on the pitches.
Yeah, sure, of course.
I can answer the question.
I mean, you know, my advice would be to come to places like this and either get to the pitching session here or whatever the next place that's doing that sort of thing is the best way to get your film out in front of the kind of people who are in the business of producing and financing.
I mean, the problem is I missed the boat, you know, regarding getting in here.
But what's the next? I don't know. The pitching forums go on all over the place all the time. So you should definitely look at whatever's next and where it's going to be. I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? To get it, yeah. Feels like the end, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, it does. People are streaming out. John, thank you very, very much indeed.
Okay, pleasure.